How will the inclusion of Indigenous education in our class affect their perception of Indigenous people? Our poster presentation is by myself, Jessica, Patricia, and Danielle. The rationale behind our presentation is that in our personal experiences and in our literature review, we found there's a dominant Eurocentric view in our classroom currently. We also found that there is a lack of Indigenous representation in our current system, as well as our current system barely scrapes the surface and it almost actually reinforces the current stereotypes of the Indigenous people. Based on this, we believe that there's a current problem that needs to be addressed in our 21st century classrooms. Our literature review showed us that there needs to be a clear change in our current system. We need to help to unmask the complexities of the Indigenous knowledge and include it into our classrooms. There also needs to be more inclusion in other subjects areas. Asher, Kernwa, and Davis found that students who were not actually including Indigenous educations beyond when it was explicitly being taught. So this is something that we can work on as educators ourselves. So this led us to our intervention. We believe that including first-hand perspectives of Indigenous people will help to reduce these stigmas, and also inclusion of written materials and resources that are by Indigenous people, as well as inviting Indigenous community members to come speak their personal narratives, as well as to help reduce the implicit bias that teachers have. We think that they should be attending workshops by Indigenous community members so they can help reduce their personal bias and things that they have.
So when considering the type of data we need to collect and how to go about this, three main data sources came to mind, the being observations, surveys, and focus groups. So when considering observations, we first thought about how do students respond to Indigenous education in our classroom currently. So when exploring this, we know we need checklists and anecdotal notes and continue to explore how students engage with the new resources that are introduced. When looking at surveys, we knew we need a pre-survey to determine students' current attitudes before the implementation of Indigenous education, and this will help inform our next steps in the direction that we need to take as educators. When looking at the mid-survey, students' attitudes throughout the process of engaging with and interacting with Indigenous education, and this will help us provide teachers an idea of the current strategies that are being implemented and whether they're successful and if they are not and why. The post-survey, this would be done towards the end of the research process. Here we'll explore why if students' attitudes have changed over time throughout the research after the Indigenous education and resources have been provided. And in the focus groups, we'd be meeting with students on a weekly basis, usually in groups of 5 or 6, to discuss some sort of open-ended questions. And these questions would allow students to open space to express their current attitudes, as well as other attitudes towards Indigenous people. When we look at our chart, we want to explore qualitative and quantitative data. When we're looking at specifically our observations, this would be done on a monthly basis from September to April. And here the teacher will be collecting data on the students' attitudes in the classroom once a month. When we're looking at the surveys, these will be done again through September to April, and 3 surveys will be implemented. So the pre-survey will be offered in September, the mid-survey in January, and the post-survey in April. Our focus group will be done on a weekly basis, and weekly check-ins with small groups will be done, again in groups of 5 or 6 from September to April, and these groups will change on a month-to-month basis just so we ensure validity and accuracy when we're doing our data collection. When we're looking again at the focus groups, we want to ensure that our transcripts are analyzed using a coding technique. So in coding, this is where we'll be taking keywords or phrases, using them as labels to describe meaningful ideas or identify major themes that are collected within the data. This will be chunked into major themes and then sub-themes that correspond with the numbering system so that we can see if there's any repetition or themes that occur within our groups. When we're looking at the survey, we'll be ensuring that there's validity by allowing students to scale when choosing their response when a statement is provided. For example, number 1 on the scale would be strongly, whereas number 1 would be strongly disagree, number 6 would be strongly agree. So here students are able to choose the statement that best agrees with their current attitudes. So finally, in observations, we'll be recording students' attitudes towards Indigenous people throughout different subject areas. Notes and responses of students' attitudes will be collected and compiled together. Also, while we're collecting, we'll be considering the setting that students are in. So data will be collected by the teacher in the classroom with students, and data will be collected to inform the principal, parents, and colleagues of the research we'll be conducting to allow feedback on current strategies that are being implemented. We'll also be informing colleagues of our action research in order to reduce the possibility of possible variables that could affect or tamper with our results of our study.
Ethical considerations is an important part within our action research project as we wanted to conduct research that maintains confidentiality. This includes the security and safety of students' identity and data collection. Within our AR process, student data collection and information will not be shared with others. Parental consent is important and imperative, and parents will be given access to research contact in case they need to address any further information or questions. Students' name and data will be kept confidential, and students are also given the freedom to exempt from any surveys, observations, and focus groups at any time with no explanations required. When focusing on the reflection of the AR process, a lot of emerging themes came through, especially when looking at our literature review. When focusing on our literature review, we noticed that there was a lot of discourses surrounding Indigenous education, and one of the most important takeaways that Indigenous education needs to be infused with Westernized curriculum in order to achieve inclusivity and positively shape the perceptions and attitudes that students have towards Indigenous people. We've come to realize that students' perceptions and attitudes towards Indigenous people are largely shaped by the complexities and layers that have been infused within Indigenous education, and it is important that we encapsulate all types of Indigenous education, not just forming it through land acknowledgements, but including life narratives, including resources that encapsulate Indigenous knowledge and teachings. We also believe that it is important to include other people's perspectives and to share findings with colleagues in order to achieve a greater sense of understanding. We believe that when we achieve this greater sense of understanding, we can produce more positive results among students and the way that we structure our curriculum within the education system. We also took away that the action research can be conducted through a variety of different methods, and that within the action research process, it kind of expands on teachers' current level of education and can challenge them to further research and develop new ways of learning about such topics.